My millionaire wife, the CEO who kicked me out because of her sister's lies, thought she would have me on my knees. 3 weeks later, she wanted to know if I had reflected. Instead, I served her with divorce papers, and her sister lost her mind. My name is Ryan Kagan, and until about 3 months ago, I thought I was living the American dream. Picture an ordinary guy with a solid career in project management married to one of the most influential women in the city, Samantha Jison. Yes, that same Jison who appears on the cover of Forbes every now and then, the CEO of Jison Luxury Real Estate, a company that controls a good part of the luxury real estate market, from Manhattan to the Hamptons. When people found out I was married to Samantha, their reactions were a mix of shock and envy. In theory, we were the perfect couple. She brought the money, the reputation, and the connections. I, in her own words, brought balance, stability, and that touch of a real man that kept her grounded. Translated, I was the reminder that a world existed outside of glass offices and six-figure cars. Our wedding photos looked like something out of a design magazine. Her penthouse, with floor-to-ceiling windows and views of Central Park, gave the feeling of floating above the rest of the world. The marble island in the kitchen cost more than a new car, and the wine cellar held bottles worth more than my college education. Samantha used to joke that marrying me had been her best investment. I would laugh, thinking she meant it in a romantic way. She didn't. That's where the story starts to twist. Samantha had a younger sister, Chloe Jison. And if Samantha was the family jewel, Chloe was the wayward sheep wrapped in designer clothes. She was 28, unemployed, and had turned living off her sister's resources into an art form. Samantha paid for absolutely everything: the apartment in Manhattan, the credit cards, the gym, the therapy sessions, the detox smoothies, and probably the luxury manicures that cost more than a whole family's monthly groceries. She called it family support. I called it what it really was: dependency disguised as privilege. From day one, Chloe looked at me with contempt. She had that arrogant expression that makes it clear you don't belong in her world. Every family dinner was torture. Me, trying to make normal conversation. Samantha, bragging about her latest multi-million-dollar deal. And Chloe, with that venomous smile, ready to launch comments disguised as concern. Samantha, honey, don't you think Ryan is getting used to your lifestyle a little too quickly? She'd say in a syrupy voice. It's adorable how comfortable he seems with luxury, almost as if he were born for it, right? Samantha, naive as few are when it came to her sister, would nod as if Chloe were sharing some profound insight, not noticing the poison hidden behind those words. Little by little, the woman who admired me began to watch me with suspicion. Her laugh became more forced, her gestures tenser, and her questions more pointed. How was your day? Transformed into, what exactly did you accomplish today? The distance grew almost invisibly. There were no fights, no shouting, no obvious betrayals, just an accumulation of doubts sown with surgical precision by Chloe. She never accused me of anything directly. She didn't need to. It was enough to suggest, to drop ambiguous phrases at the right moments. Sunday dinner became an interrogation disguised as conversation. Samantha would talk about investments and figures while I tried not to seem out of place. Chloe, wine glass in hand, would toss little bombs wrapped in kindness. Ryan, tell us about your projects. Nothing too stressful, I hope. It would be terrible if you felt overwhelmed. It all sounded polite, but the message was clear. You don't belong here. You're not up to par. And Samantha started to believe it. Samantha was never the type to attack head-on. Her style was much more subtle, almost surgical. She didn't need to yell or confront. It was enough to drop small phrases, poisoned insinuations that lodged in her sister's mind like psychological termites. I'm just worried about you, Sam, she would say during those sister chats, to which, of course, I was not invited. You're so trusting, so generous. Sometimes I'm afraid someone might take advantage of that big heart. And there was the trick. Samantha, who could spot a bad investment just by reading a contract's header, couldn't see the obvious. Her sister Chloe manipulated her with surgical precision. The most frustrating part was that I noticed everything. Day after day, I watched my marriage slowly crumble amidst whispers, calculated glances, and silences filled with venom. It was like watching a slow-motion accident, knowing I couldn't grab the steering wheel. I tried to talk to Samantha about it once. It was a monumental mistake. She looked at me as if I had suggested her sister had a hidden drug lab in her Park Avenue apartment. "Chloe loves me, Ryan," she said with that firm tone she used in meetings with investors. "She's just looking out for me. Maybe you should try to understand her instead of being on the defensive all the time." That's when I understood that this battle was lost. In her mind, I was the intruder, the element that didn't fit into the equation of her perfect life. Chloe had the advantage, 28 years of shared history, inside jokes, and the authority of a blood bond. I, on the other hand, had barely 3 years of marriage and the unofficial title of the paranoid husband who didn't know how to deal with family. But what neither Samantha nor her sister imagined was that behind my calm facade, I was no fool. I wasn't going to let them destroy me without a fight. They underestimated me. They thought I would resign myself, that I would bow my head while they pointed at me as the problem. How wrong they were. What came next was a spectacle of manipulation worthy of study. Chloe had mastered the art of conflict. She could create drama in an empty room and walk away clean. Lying, for her, was a form of expression. She didn't just do it well, she did it with talent. She invented stories, perfected them, and presented them with such confidence that anyone would doubt their own memories. It was, honestly, as impressive as it was terrifying. The first direct attack came on a Tuesday with an accusation so absurd I still remember it clearly. I had planned to have lunch with Samantha at her favorite restaurant, that pretentious bistro downtown where they charged $30 for an artisanal salad. I was running late from a client meeting when I received a text from her. "I need to think about some things," Chloe told me. 6 words, 6 simple words that unleashed chaos. I knew something was twisted. When I got home that afternoon, the atmosphere was icy. Samantha was waiting for me in her white armchair, that leather monstrosity that cost more than half the building's rent, with an expression of pure disappointment. "We need to talk," she said. And if you've ever been married, you know those 4 words are equivalent to a red alert. Of course, love. "What's wrong?" I tried to stay calm, although I felt my stomach tying itself in knots. She took a deep breath, like someone preparing for a painful confession. "Chloe saw you having lunch with a woman today. A blonde, at Cafe Milano." I had to suppress a laugh at how ridiculous it sounded. First, because I hadn't even been to that place, I spent the whole day in a boardroom discussing construction schedules with 3 middle-aged men. And second, the only blonde I had spoken to was the Starbucks barista, who had misspelled my name on the cup despite me spelling it out for her. Still, Chloe had sown the seed of doubt, and Samantha was watering it with devotion. "Honey, I was in meetings all day. I can show you my calendar, my emails, I can even request the building security footage if you want," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But with Chloe, it was never a matter of proof. Her lies worked through atmosphere, through context. She built stories in which I was the villain, and she was the concerned sister just trying to save Samantha from suffering. "It's not just about today, Ryan," she said, repeating almost word for word what she had surely heard from her sister. "I've noticed things lately. You're dressing better, spending more hours at the office, you're more concerned with your appearance." I looked at her, incredulous. "Seriously? I'm dressing better because you bought me the clothes. I'm staying at work longer because we just closed 3 new contracts. And I'm taking care of my appearance because I'm married to one of the most successful women in the city, and I want to be at your level at events, not embarrass you. But logic is useless when someone has already decided you're guilty." Samantha had that cold look, the same one she used when she knew she was going to win a negotiation. She had already formed her opinion and was only looking for arguments to back it up. The suspicions about money came later, because apparently, being the alleged cheating husband wasn't enough, now I was also a financial opportunist. According to Chloe, I was diverting funds to hidden businesses and using Samantha's contacts for my own benefit. Ironic, considering Chloe's only paid activity was spending her sister's money. That night, Samantha showed me a couple of bank statements. "Look, Ryan. Your transfers. There are movements to accounts I don't recognize," she said in an accusatory tone. And that's when I almost burst out laughing. Those mysterious transfers were the money I had been secretly setting aside to surprise her with a trip to Italy for our anniversary. The unknown accounts were marked in my banking app with labels like Anniversary Fund and Italy Trip. But Chloe had taken screenshots from such strategic angles that everything looked incriminating, as if she were a forensic finance expert who never managed to graduate as a detective. "Samantha, those are savings for your anniversary present," I told her, trying to stay calm. "I can log into the account right now and show you everything she's distorting." And yet, I could feel Chloe's voice whispering in her ear, "He could have prepared that story as a cover-up in case you found out." At that moment, I understood that I was facing a level of paranoia worthy of a conspiracy theory. No matter what proof I gave, she always found a new explanation that painted me as the villain. It was like playing a chess game with someone who changed the rules every time they were about to lose. The worst part wasn't the accusations, it was watching Samantha become someone unrecognizable. The woman who used to trust me blindly, who would defend me against anyone, now analyzed my every word as if she needed 3 independent sources to verify it. My friends tried to warn me. Mark from work took me out for a drink one night and said, "Brother, that sister-in-law of yours is pure poison. Samantha is letting her pull her strings like a puppet." Jason, on the other hand, was more direct. "You have to get ahead of this before it becomes uncontrollable. Chloe has you in her sights, and she's not going to stop until she gets what she wants." But I was stubborn. I believed that love would overcome any manipulation, that 3 years of marriage would weigh more than a lifetime of emotional dependency and family ties based on self-interest. I thought Samantha would eventually see through her sister's game and open her eyes. I was monumentally wrong. The confrontation that changed everything happened on a Thursday night. I remember it well because we were supposed to watch the season finale of that series about billionaires with ridiculous problems, which managed to make ours seem trivial. But instead, Samantha was waiting for me in the living room with what looked like a corporate presentation, printed emails, highlighted bank statements, and even a timeline of my supposed infidelities. The whole job had Chloe's unmistakable stamp on it, although my wife presented it as if she had discovered it all on her own. "I can't go on with this, Ryan," she said, her tone as icy as a Manhattan winter. Chloe would never lie to me about something so serious. She loves me, she protects me, and everything she's told me fits perfectly. Right then, I knew I had lost. Not because of anything I had done, but because Chloe had played the long game with surgical precision. She had managed to convince Samantha that loving meant distrusting, that trusting was naive, and that her sister, the same one who had been draining her of money and energy for years, was more trustworthy than the husband who was building a future by her side. Looking back, I should have seen it coming. But when you're in the middle of the hurricane, it's impossible to notice the storm forming around you. The home that was once our refuge had officially become enemy territory. In the movies, when the protagonist's world is torn down, there's dramatic music and a slow-motion shot to emphasize the betrayal. In real life, there's no soundtrack, just the unbearable silence of the blow. Getting kicked out of your own home has nothing cinematic about it. It's humiliating and desolate. It was a Friday in October. I remember because the leaves in Central Park were starting to change color, and I thought about how we used to walk there during our first autumn together. How ironic, the brain clings to the most useless memories right when the world is falling apart. I came home from work, loosening my tie, imagining a quiet weekend, order food from Samantha's favorite restaurant, watch something light on Netflix, the routine of a normal couple. But when I walked in, I found a scene worthy of an emergency board meeting. Samantha was in the middle of the living room, as she would soon remind me, dressed in that navy blue suit she wore when she was about to close a deal. And behind her, like a satisfied shadow, was Chloe, with a smile so cynical it seemed to feed on my bewilderment. "We need to talk," Samantha said. That phrase had become her favorite weapon lately. I dropped my briefcase on the sofa, trying to gauge the atmosphere. The air felt dense, as if I were being prepared for a sentencing, not a marital conversation. Samantha took a deep breath. The kind one takes before demolishing something. "Pack your things, Ryan. I can't trust you anymore." Just like that. No introduction, no warning, no pause. A sentence that hit me like a freight train of confusion. "Sorry," I managed to say, still hoping it was all a bad joke. But it wasn't. "You heard me," she replied in her executive tone, the same one she used when firing employees. "I want you to leave. Tonight. I can't live under the same roof as someone I don't trust." Her roof, not our roof. 3 years of marriage reduced to that. A guest who had overstayed his welcome. Behind her, Chloe could barely contain her glee. She didn't even bother to feign concern. She was enjoying the moment like a cat that had just caught the clumsiest mouse in the neighborhood. "Sam, please, let's talk," I said, trying to stay calm, as if I were negotiating a contract instead of fighting for my life. But when I tried to explain, she raised her hand to silence me. "Don't try to blame my sister," she interrupted. "Chloe didn't force you to lie to me, or hide things from me, or take advantage of me and my contacts." It was like listening to a complete list of the poisons Chloe had been pouring into her mind for months. Chloe's words struck like venom disguised as compassion. Each of her sentences was loaded with a false conviction, as if she truly believed her own lies. "None of that is true, Samantha. And you know it," I said, trying to stay calm, though I could hear desperation creeping into my words. "I have never lied to you. I have never been unfaithful. And of course, I have never used you for anything. I love you." Chloe let out a short laugh, almost a snort, as if she'd just heard the most absurd joke in the world. "Please, Ryan. Save the show for someone who'll buy a ticket." "I'm not talking to you," I retorted firmly, turning to her for the first time since this hellish conversation began. "In fact, I'm sure this doesn't concern you." "It became my business the day you started hurting my sister," she answered, with that well-rehearsed tone of moral superiority that sounded almost theatrical. "Samantha deserves someone who doesn't cheat on her every day." Then Samantha took a step forward, positioning herself slightly in front of her sister, as if trying to protect her from me. That gesture made everything clear. "Chloe wouldn't lie to me about something so serious," she said, her voice trembling. "Ryan. She loves me. She's just looking out for me, and frankly, she's been right about you from the beginning." From the beginning. Those words hit me like a delayed revelation. Chloe had been planning my downfall from day one, and Samantha was admitting it just like that, as if she were finally taking off a blindfold. 3 years of marriage during which her sister had been poisoning every conversation, every doubt, every silence. And instead of defending what we had, my wife had been taking notes. "So that's it?" I asked, feeling something inside me harden, as if my heart were turning to stone in real time. 3 years of marriage thrown in the trash because your unemployed, mooching sister convinced you I'm some kind of criminal. The comment hit its mark. Chloe flushed, furious. For a second, I saw a crack in her mask of superiority, but Samantha stepped between us again, adopting that authoritarian tone she used in company meetings. "Leave, Ryan. Before I call security." Security. My wife was threatening to call security in our own home. In the place where we had laughed, argued, made plans, shared dreams, and celebrated anniversaries. They were going to remove me like a common trespasser from the home we had built together. I looked around the living room one last time, the sofa where we used to watch movies, the table where we hosted our friends, the huge windows from which we planned to watch the city as we grew old. It all felt foreign, as if I were looking at a museum of a life that no longer belonged to me. "Fine," I said, surprised at the empty tone of my own voice. "I'll pack my things." I went to her bedroom, I guess, and started throwing some clothes and personal items into a bag. I did it all on autopilot, while my mind tried to understand at what point my life had imploded. Behind me, I could hear Chloe's muffled whisper to Samantha, probably finishing off her victory with some venomous comment. I packed clothes, toiletries, and some important papers into a duffel bag. 3 years of life reduced to what could fit in a bag. Chloe stood in the doorway, watching me with the same coldness as a guard checking a prisoner leaving his cell. When I returned to the living room, Samantha was holding the door open. She wouldn't look at me. Chloe was practically jumping with satisfaction. "You're making a mistake, Samantha," I said one last time. "Someday, you'll realize." "The only mistake was believing you," she replied without looking up. And I left. I walked out of the penthouse, out of the building, and out of the life I had built with a woman who didn't even give me a chance to explain. The thud of the door closing behind me sounded like a coffin sealing shut. I stood on the sidewalk with a single bag over my shoulder, as the city carried on, indifferent to my ruin. Despite everything, I felt something unexpected: relief. Beneath the rage, the sadness, and the betrayal, there was a sense of rest, as if I had finally stopped pretending everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. They thought they had won. They thought I would come back begging, ready to apologize and promise to be the ideal man Chloe had invented in her head. They had no idea what they had just unleashed. Have you heard of those places where they put you in isolation tanks to help you reconnect with yourself? Well, the 3 weeks I spent in my tiny downtown apartment were exactly that, only without the inner peace. Mine was more like a revenge laboratory in progress. The new place was what real estate agents call cozy, but what any normal person would describe as a shoebox with delusions of grandeur. 600 square feet of pure mediocrity, with a refrigerator that groaned like a dying whale and neighbors who practiced interpretive dance at 2 a.m. After living in Samantha's palace for 3 years, this was like going from first class to the cargo hold. But at least it was mine. No one could kick me out of there. No one could look me in the eye and tell me they didn't trust me anymore. And above all, no one could fill the air with rumors and lies while I was just trying to watch a series and eat cereal for dinner in peace. The first few days were tough, I won't deny it. I spent hours staring at the ceiling, trying to understand how my life had veered so violently into disaster. I would wake up out of habit, reaching for Samantha beside me, only to remember that she and Chloe were probably toasting with champagne, celebrating their victory over the supposed emotional con artist who had shared her bed for 3 years. But there's a funny thing about hitting rock bottom. At least the ground is firm. And as I ate Chinese food out of cardboard containers, surrounded by silence and unopened boxes, I started to notice something else. My phone wasn't ringing. Not a single call from Samantha. Not a text asking how I was. Not an apology. Not even an attempt at conversation. Nothing. Just silence. The same silence that, unbeknownst to her, would mark the beginning of my reconstruction. And her downfall. Absolute silence. Not a message, not a call, not a word from Samantha. That silence said it all. 3 years of marriage that apparently hadn't meant much to her. Kicking out her husband seemed to have been as easy as getting rid of old furniture. Once I was out of the house, I simply disappeared from her mind. But her sister Chloe was another story. She was enjoying the show as if it were her great personal triumph. Social media had become her stage, and I had to watch from the front row. She posted photos at expensive restaurants with captions like, "Grateful for family that always has your back." On Facebook, she shared quotes about the need to cut ties with toxic people in order to grow. And on Twitter, she joined in on causes about strong women who deserve more. Every post was like a small digital slap in the face aimed at me. The irony was that Chloe did all this using Samantha's resources, her money, her contacts, her company. The unemployed sister, the one who had never worked a single day in her life, paraded around the internet as an influencer of someone else's success. And still, I was the villain in this story. Instead of getting angry, as the old Ryan would have, I started to get curious. Something didn't add up. If I was such a bad husband, so deceitful and manipulative, why wasn't Samantha saying anything? Why wasn't she posting her own celebrations of recovered freedom? Why was Chloe the one handling the entire public campaign while Samantha remained strangely silent? That's when I started to observe the details. And believe me, after 20 years working as a project manager, spotting others' mistakes and resolving financial disasters, you develop a trained eye for noticing what doesn't fit. First, I noticed that Samantha's company, Jason Luxury Real Estate, had been unusually quiet for weeks. No press releases, no new launches, not a single announcement of record sales. For someone who used to treat business success like a contact sport, that silence was suspicious. Then I looked at Chloe. She posted constantly, yes, but always from the same places, the penthouse, the expensive cafe Samantha liked, the same 3 or 4 restaurants. For a woman who claimed to be living her best life, her world seemed to be reduced to a few repeated backdrops. And one more thing, no one from Samantha's professional circle had contacted me. No partners, no friends, not even the typical busybodies who usually look for gossip. In a circle where rumors flew faster than financial news, that silence was too artificial. So I did what I do best, I investigated. Not in an obsessive or unhealthy way, but with professional precision. I started with what was accessible, public records, business filings, everything that could be legally consulted. And that's where the pieces started to move. I discovered that Jason Luxury Real Estate was having a difficult quarter. Some major projects had fallen through. A couple of investors had pulled their money. And a development project Samantha's favorite for the last 2 years was facing regulatory hurdles. It wasn't a catastrophe, but it was a blow for someone used to always winning. Then I remembered the prenuptial agreement. Yes, that contract Samantha had me sign when she still believed our love was bulletproof and that her intention was to protect me if something went wrong with her business. At that time, she was a woman in love, not a paranoid executive listening to her sister. Few people know this, but a prenup can turn against the person who drafted it, depending on how it's written and the circumstances of the divorce. In this case, if the wealthy party, Samantha, initiated the separation based on false accusations or refused to seek mediation, the clauses played in my favor. And that was exactly what had happened. I read that document word for word. 3 years ago, Samantha was a different person, in love, empathetic, protective. She had included clauses that protected me if she were to behave in an abusive, controlling, or unfaithful manner. It also established considerable financial compensation if the marriage ended due to her misconduct or irrational decisions. In other words, kicking her husband out because of the lies of an idle sister and refusing to even talk about it put her directly in dangerous territory. Samantha probably didn't even remember signing those parts of the contract. She was so obsessed with shielding her assets from a potential bad husband that, without realizing it, she had protected me from herself. As I understood this, I began to gather evidence. Screenshots of Chloe's posts, especially those bordering on defamation, records of my attempts to communicate with Samantha, proof of where I had actually been on the days I was supposedly seeing other women or doing shady deals. Little by little, with patience and precision, I built a solid file. Not with the intention of destroying anyone, but because I was tired of being the scapegoat for the problems of a drama-addicted family. 3 weeks after she kicked me out, Samantha called. It was a Tuesday morning. I was in my kitchen, drinking coffee while reviewing some financial reports I had requested from our accountant. I saw her name on the screen and hesitated to answer, but curiosity won. "Ryan," she said, her tone different. Weaker. Less confident. We need to talk. Have you had time to reflect? Reflect. As if I were a grounded teenager who had to think about what I'd done. Sure, Samantha, I replied, feigning serenity. I've had plenty of time to do just that. Good. Could you come to my office tomorrow? Let's say, 2 p.m. I want to talk about how to move forward. Move forward. Translated into Samantha's language, she wanted to see if I was ready to grovel, apologize for non-existent crimes, and sign some document that would leave her free and morally clean. I'll be there, I answered. And I would. Yes. But not for the reasons she imagined. Because after 3 weeks of reflection, I was ready to show her and her manipulative sister what a man really accomplishes when he refuses to keep being the weak character in their story. You know that feeling in a poker game when you're holding a royal flush and everyone else thinks they're about to take all your chips? That was exactly mine. That exact feeling was what I had as I sat in my small, run-down apartment the morning after Samantha's call. The coffee tasted like it had been filtered through a gym towel, but I drank it anyway, trying to gather the calm for the most important performance of my life. She had decided our conversation should take place in her office. Of course. Why talk about the collapse of a marriage in a neutral place when you can do it in the center of your empire, surrounded by your subordinates and symbols of your power? It was a typical Samantha Jason move. Control the environment, the narrative, and ultimately, the outcome. She probably had it all rehearsed. Maybe her assistant had even scheduled it between a meeting with the urban committee and another with some millionaire client. Have you had time to reflect? She had asked me, with that voice she used when giving feedback to an employee. The incredible part was her complete lack of self-awareness. The same woman who had kicked me out of our home because of the lies of her professional mooch sister, Chloe, was now treating me like a naughty child. Yes, I had reflected. Enough to have practically become a philosopher of marital disaster. That morning, I prepared as if for war. I showered, shaved, and put on my best suit, the dark gray one Samantha had given me for her company's annual gala, back when she still bragged about having me by her side. It was ironic. I would use her gift to confront her and dismantle the false beliefs she herself had fueled. The briefcase was my secret weapon. Black, leather, expensive, the kind that makes anyone think you're carrying documents that can change a meeting. It was also a gift from her, for our second anniversary, back when she still thought having a project manager husband was a source of pride, not shame. Inside, I had prepared everything with precision, copies of the prenuptial agreement with the relevant clauses highlighted, bank statements, receipts, screenshots of Chloe's posts, and proof of my real locations on the days I had supposedly cheated on her. But the real strength of my strategy wasn't in what I brought, but in what I omitted. Sometimes the best tactic is to let your opponents think they know everything, while you keep the winning card for the perfect moment. I arrived at the building 20 minutes early. Punctuality, one of those middle-class habits I never shook. The lobby was a display of marble and glass, a monument to money. The guard greeted me with familiarity. He probably remembered me from all the times I had passed through with flowers or lunch for Samantha, back when I still thought my support meant something. I rode up to the 15th floor, listening to that bland instrumental music that only serves to distract you from what you're really about to face. The receptionist, Natalie, if my memory served me right, smiled at me with that corporate kindness that doesn't reach the eyes. Mr. Kagan. It's been a while. Mrs. Jason is waiting for you in the conference room. The conference room. The large one, with the windows that dominated the city. The one used for meetings with investors or high-ranking officials. In other words, Samantha didn't just want to talk, she wanted to make the power hierarchy clear. I sat down to wait, watching the Jason development employees come and go. Some recognized me. They had been at our wedding. They had congratulated me. Now they were probably discussing my sudden disappearance and repeating the version Chloe had spread. I doubted any of them knew the truth. In those environments, everything seems momentous, even when it's just personal drama disguised as professionalism. But if Samantha wanted to treat me like a business matter, I was willing to play by her rules. My phone vibrated. It was a text from my lawyer. Documents ready. Give them hell. Documents, plural. While she was enjoying her supposed victory, I had done what she never imagined, seek serious legal counsel. At 2 p.m. sharp, Natalie reappeared with that polished smile that seemed part of the uniform. Mrs. Jison will see you now. I walked behind her down the hallway, decorated with photos of Samantha shaking hands with politicians and businessmen. This office was her kingdom, her monument to self-sufficiency and control. In a few minutes, I planned to show her how much of that power was an illusion. The conference room door opened, and there she was, sitting at the far end of the long mahogany table. Impeccable as always, although I noticed something different. Tiredness. Tension. Maybe the shadow of a doubt. And at her right, of course, was Chloe, settled in as if she were her personal advisor. No surprise there. The woman who had caused this whole crisis wouldn't miss my supposed humiliation for anything in the world. Ryan, Samantha said, motioning to the chair across from her. Please, sit. I settled in calmly and placed the briefcase on the table with deliberation. They both eyed it, perhaps imagining I was carrying a pathetic list of apologies. Thank you for coming, she began, in her executive tone. I hope these past few weeks have allowed you to reflect on what happened. What happened? That's what she called it. As if our marriage had disintegrated by spontaneous combustion and not because of her sister's lies. I've thought a lot. Yes, I replied, keeping my voice serene. More than you can imagine. Chloe leaned forward with that mocking smile I hated so much, ready to intervene at any moment. She was already enjoying all of this, waiting for the exact instant I would break down and beg for forgiveness, while she could play the role of the protective sister who had saved Samantha from a wrong marriage. Good, Samantha said, with that calm voice she used to deliver bad news in her company meetings. I think we need to talk about how we're going to handle this situation from now on. Our marriage, our living arrangements, our future. That small pause before repeating the word future told me everything. She had a clear idea of the future she was imagining, one where there would be a divorce, probably with the full weight of the blame falling on me. There would be a financial settlement, surely very advantageous for her. And, of course, the public narrative would be perfect, the successful businesswoman deceived by her gold-digging husband, while her loyal sister Chloe tried to warn her in time. A clean, predictable, and very convenient plan. Except for one small detail. I had spent 3 weeks preparing something much better. You're right, Samantha, I said, calmly reaching for my briefcase. In fact, I brought some documents that can help us clarify what that future you're talking about will look like. The click of the briefcase opening echoed like a detonation in the conference room. Both women stopped smiling. Their faces, once confident and dominant, tensed with a mixture of surprise and distrust. Before we begin, I continued, pulling out a perfectly ordered stack of papers, I want to say that I have had a lot of time to reflect these past few weeks. About our marriage, about trust. And about what happens when people make decisions based on assumptions instead of facts. I placed the papers on the table and looked at her directly for the first time since I had entered the room. And I've come to the conclusion that you're right. It's time to talk about how we're going to handle all this. I added, slowly pushing the documents towards her. Starting with these divorce papers I'd like you to sign. Samantha's expression transformed instantly. She looked like someone who had just realized they'd been playing checkers while their opponent was playing chess. The documents hit the mahogany table with the impact of a bomb wrapped in legal letterhead. The silence that followed was almost physical, so dense you could imagine cutting it and serving it at the banquets she used to host. The two women stared at the papers as if I had just pulled a live snake out of my briefcase. Samantha reached out a hand with obvious nervousness. The mask of the unflappable CEO was beginning to crack. Chloe, on the other hand, seemed to have lost all her composure. The haughty gesture and air of superiority vanished completely, leaving in their place a grimace of confusion and panic. What? What is this? Samantha asked, her voice trembling, betraying how much the blow had affected her. They're divorce papers, I replied in a calm, almost didactic tone. You know, those documents that end a marriage when one spouse decides to kick the other out of the house based on false accusations. My voice remained serene, professional, even kind. After all, we were in a work environment, and I believed in courtesy. Even when I was destroying, piece by piece, the story they had fabricated. Samantha began to read. I watched her face change as she moved through the pages. First confusion, then surprise, then disbelief, and finally, a shadow of pure fear. Ryan, she said slowly, trying to regain her usual control, I'm sure we can talk about this like adults. There's no need to involve lawyers. We can resolve this. Privately. Privately. The translation was clear. She wanted to handle it out of the public eye, control the narrative, and spin the facts. Of course, we can do this like adults, I replied with a smile. You're an adult. I'm an adult. And these are the adult results of your adult decisions. Funny how that works, isn't it? No. Chloe, who had been silent until that moment, suddenly exploded. You can't do this, she yelled, slamming the table so hard the water glasses trembled. You can't just come in here and destroy my sister's life just because you got caught. And there it was. The mask had fallen. The protective sister vanished, revealing the real Chloe, full of rage and fear. Caught doing what, exactly? I asked, looking directly at her. Please, enlighten me. You know perfectly well what you did, she shrieked, growing more agitated. The affairs, the money, the lies. Affairs? I countered calmly. Are you referring to the times I was supposedly seen at Café Milano when I was in work meetings with witnesses present? Or the mysterious blonde, who turned out to be a barista who can't even spell my name right on a cup? Chloe flushed, visibly flustered. And the money? The secret accounts? I took out my phone, unlocked it, and opened the banking app with deliberate slowness. Do you mean this one? I showed her the screen. Anniversary fund. Italy trip. It was a romantic surprise for Samantha. If you want, I can forward the receipts directly to her legal team. Samantha's face lost all color. She had reached the interesting part of the documents, the prenup clauses. It was explained there, in clear terms, what happened when the marriage ended due to irrational behavior from the wealthy spouse, impulsive decisions, unverified accusations, and disregard for commitments of trust. Ryan, she said in a low, different, almost human voice, I don't remember agreeing to these conditions. You insisted on including them, I reminded her serenely. You wanted me to feel secure. To never think you might use your money as a weapon if things got complicated. The irony was so thick you could have paved streets with it. Samantha had, without knowing it, created the very legal mechanism that now protected me. Chloe peered over her sister's shoulder and read with desperation. Her face turned white, then green. She understood the inevitable. Her comfortable life depended on Samantha. And Samantha had just ruined everything by following her lies. Samantha. You can't sign this, Chloe whispered. There has to be another way. Fight what? Samantha replied, without looking up. Fight the prenup that I demanded. Fight the evidence that proves Ryan didn't cheat on me. Or fight the fact that I kicked him out of our home without verifying anything. She raised her gaze to me, and for an instant, I saw the woman I had fallen in love with 4 years ago. Intelligent, brilliant, powerful. But also human, with a vulnerability she rarely let show behind that corporate armor. How much? She asked in a low voice. I pretended to think for a few seconds, although I had known every clause and figure in the agreement by heart for weeks. according to the prenuptial agreement that you drafted, and considering the conditions of our separation. The monthly alimony payment is equivalent to 30% of your net income for the next 5 years. Additionally, you will be required to make a one-time payment of $2.4 million within 60 days of the divorce decree. Chloe let out a sound between a gasp and a nervous laugh, as if she were choking on her own disbelief. $2.4 million. Samantha, that's insane. You can't pay that. The business, the expenses. The gambling debts, I said with perfect calm, letting the words hang in the air. The two of them froze. Even the silence seemed to tense. It was as if the entire building was holding its breath. Gambling. Debts? Samantha repeated slowly. And right there, I knew I had them exactly where I wanted. The ideal moment to begin the real demolition. Have you ever seen a controlled demolition in slow motion? First, the foundations explode, and then the entire building collapses, floor by floor, until it's reduced to dust. That's exactly what happened to Chloe Jyson's composure in that instant. 1 second, she was still pretending to be the concerned sister, the victim of the story. The next, she shot up from her chair, screaming as if she'd just received an electric shock. You're a damned, manipulative liar. You can't prove anything. Ah, but that was the detail. Gambling addicts always leave a trail. And those who think they're smarter than everyone else leave an even bigger one. Her record was as long as a Black Friday shopping receipt. But when that trail includes diverting money from your sister's company to feed your addiction, it stops being a simple chain of mistakes and becomes a neon-lit highway straight to prison. Samantha stared at her as if she didn't know her. Gambling debts, Chloe. What is he talking about? Nothing, she retorted, her voice so high-pitched it barely sounded human. He's making it all up. He's trying to distract from his own failings. My failings? I interrupted, opening my briefcase and taking out a thick envelope. Do you mean this? I placed the folder on the table gently. The silence was absolute. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioning. These are bank statements, I explained naturally, as if we were discussing the weather. They're not mine, of course. You've already made it clear that my finances are more than scrutinized. They belong to several offshore accounts, opened with Samantha Jyson's corporate credit and social security number. The color drained from Samantha's face. What are you saying, Ryan? What's interesting, I continued, fanning out the documents with care, is that someone has been transferring money from Jyson Luxury Real Estate's operating accounts into these foreign funds for the last 18 months. It started with small amounts $5,000 here, $10,000 there, but it escalated over time. Chloe recoiled, moving away from the table as if the papers were on fire. You can't. How? How did you get those? I smiled at her with the calm of a shark that smells blood in the water. Let's just say being married to a CEO gave me some contacts in the world of financial investigations. When you pay enough, every trail stops being invisible. I pulled out another sheet, highlighted in colors. Here, for example, you can see the constant withdrawals at casinos in Atlantic City, Las Vegas. And my personal favorite, an online poker site called Lucky Lady's Chance. Good taste, eh? Very discreet. Samantha moved closer, reading over my shoulder. Her breathing was rapid, almost hitched. Chloe. Tell me this isn't what it looks like. It's not. He fabricated it. He's trying to frame me because he knows he got caught. I took out my phone and opened the gallery with a theatricality that would have made Shakespeare smile. Funny, Chloe. For someone who claims to be being framed, you take a lot of selfies at casino tables. The photos were sharp, perfect. Chloe smiling in front of slot machines, at blackjack tables, poker tables. All with dates and locations that matched the bank withdrawals exactly. She had enthusiastically documented her own downfall. You posted these yourself, I explained to Samantha. Apparently, your sister thought her gambling nights deserved to be shared with the world. She saved us months of work. Samantha looked at her with a mixture of rage and disappointment. You stole from me. You stole from my company, Chloe. I didn't steal anything, she screamed, drenched in sweat, her makeup running down her cheeks. I just borrowed it. I was going to pay it back. I was on a hot streak. I let out a dry laugh. A hot streak? According to these records, you lost over $473,000 in a year and a half. If that's a winning streak, I'd hate to see a losing one. The number hit her with the force of an invisible punch. Samantha had to lean against the conference table to keep her balance. $473,000, she repeated, her voice cracking. Chloe, that's almost half of our emergency fund. It would have been more, I replied, trying to stay calm, but the transfers caught the attention of the bank's anti-fraud system. Apparently, when someone starts moving money to offshore gambling accounts, banks get a little nervous. Who would have thought? That's when Chloe completely lost control. She started to scream not words, but a raw, shapeless, overflowing roar of pure fury. Before anyone could react, she grabbed the water pitcher from the center of the table and threw it at me with frightening accuracy. I ducked just in time. The glass shattered against the wall, spraying water and shards everywhere. In seconds, the room looked like the scene of a hurricane. You destroyed everything, she shrieked, advancing on me with her hands turned into claws. Everything I built. Everything What you built? Samantha repeated with a sharp calm. You didn't build anything, Chloe. You've never worked a single day in your life. You've lived off my money, stolen from my company, and lied to me for years. The two sisters stood face to face, separated by the wreckage of glass and water. In that instant, the resemblance between them was undeniable. Same features, same bearing. But while Samantha radiated authority and strength, Chloe seemed like a distorted shadow of those same qualities, twisted by desperation and guilt. I was protecting you. From him. Chloe screamed, pointing a finger at me as if I were the cause of all her problems. He was using you. He was going to take everything you achieved. The only person who's been taking everything I've achieved is you, Samantha replied, her voice cold, the same voice she used to disarm opponents in business negotiations. You've been stealing from me while telling me my husband was the criminal. I decided to intervene before someone ended up hurt. Samantha, I think we should call security. And maybe the police. Embezzlement is a serious crime. And throwing objects could be considered assault. That last word seemed to snap Chloe back to some semblance of sanity. She stopped, looking around as if just realizing the magnitude of the disaster. Sam. Please, she stammered, her voice broken. I'm your sister. We can fix this. I'll get help. I'll go to therapy, to Gamblers Anonymous, whatever you want. But don't. Don't do this. Don't do what? Samantha interrupted harshly. Not hold you responsible for robbing me. Not demand an explanation for you destroying my marriage. Not expect you to face the consequences of your lies. Chloe collapsed into her chair, exhausted, and began to cry for real. These weren't restrained or dramatic tears, but a raw, ragged sobbing, her mask streaked, her breath catching. It was the cry of someone watching their world fall apart. Samantha watched her in silence for a few seconds, then turned her gaze back to me. Ryan, she said in a low voice, I owe you an apology. A very big one. But I wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. Actually, Samantha, I replied, calmly straightening the documents on the table. What you owe me is your signature on the divorce papers. Because what comes next is just the beginning of the real reckoning. They say truth is stranger than fiction, and believe me, they're not wrong. After 3 weeks investigating Chloe Jyson's financial activities, I came to the conclusion that whoever coined that phrase never met someone capable of building their entire life on a mountain of lies, theft, and manipulation disguised as innocence. The funniest thing about people like Chloe is that they never commit just one crime. They are professional accumulators of fraud, incapable of stopping. And as I watched her theatrical collapse in Samantha's boardroom, I knew we hadn't reached the bottom yet. My lawyer had done an impeccable, almost artistic, job. He was like a financial archaeologist, unearthing layer after layer of deception until he revealed the fossilized remains of the fraud. While Chloe sobbed and Samantha stared at her, unrecognizable, I opened my briefcase one more time. Actually, I said, pulling out another folder, even thicker than the last, the gambling is just the tip of the iceberg. Samantha looked at me with a mixture of disbelief and exhaustion. There's more? She asked. Oh yes. Much more. I opened the folder with the same care someone would use to handle radioactive material. When you hire a really good financial investigator, one of those who charges in a day what many earn in a month, they don't just check the obvious. They trace every detail, follow the hidden threads, reconstruct the paths that others don't even know exist. Chloe stopped crying. She was looking at me with an expression of pure terror, as if she suddenly understood there was no way out. What we discovered, I continued, spreading the documents on the table as if revealing a winning hand in poker, is that our dear Chloe has been running a veritable fraud network for some time. The first document was a credit report that looked like it had been through a shredder. 17 credit cards. Opened in Samantha Jyson's name. With a total limit exceeding $600,000. Samantha froze. Her face was a reflection of all the stages of grief compressed into seconds: shock, anger, sadness, and finally, the icy acceptance of a truth impossible to deny. The credit cards. In my name. They were all maxed out. As if someone had set out to push them to absolute collapse. And of course, the monthly payments were being paid automatically, I said with a bitter smile, trying not to let the rage filter into my voice. For the last 2 years, the automatic payments have been debited directly from Jyson Luxury Real Estate's accounts. I guess your accounting department thought they were legitimate business expenses. No. The silence that followed was heavy, tense, almost physical. I broke it by spreading out another sheet, a document saturated with highlighters, as if a rainbow had been massacred on the paper. Here is the complete list, I added, leaning my elbows on the table. Personal loans, business lines of credit, and something I honestly didn't even know existed, a luxury lifestyle advance. If you ask me, that sounds like something 3 guys in a basement invented, charging interest rates that would make a loan shark blush. Chloe started to make small, choked sobs, as if realizing there was no way to reverse what was coming. Samantha, on the other hand, had that look I knew all too well. The cold stare, the tight lips, the brow furrowed. Right before she destroyed someone in a corporate meeting. How much are we talking about, exactly? She asked, her tone so flat and distant it sent a chill down my spine. Anyone who knew her would know that this was her warning sign that the fury was about to erupt. I paused theatrically and pretended to check my notes, even though I knew every number, every amount, every compound interest point by heart. Summing up the gambling losses, the credit card debts, the loans, and the accrued interest. We're talking about $1.2 million. All meticulously transferred to your personal credit and your company's. The air became dense, still. The only sound was the distant ding of the elevator in the hallway. Samantha stared at the documents as if she was struggling to process what she was seeing, while Chloe seemed to be debating whether to cry or run for the 15th floor window. But don't worry, there's more, I said calmly, as if announcing the second act of a play. Because when you're dealing with someone who has perfected the art of financial parasitism, a simple scam is never enough. There's always a second layer. A creative touch to the crime. From my briefcase, I pulled out a new stack of papers. Property deeds. Mortgages. Loan documents. Turns out, your sister became quite the real estate investor, I added, enjoying the bewilderment spreading across Samantha's face. What properties? She asked, as if she already feared the answer. 3 condos in Miami, a beach house in the Hamptons, and my personal favorite, a stake in a timeshare in Aspen that includes its own private ski instructor. I spread the documents on the table with the same precision a forensic scientist would arrange evidence at a crime scene. All acquired with loans guaranteed by the assets of Jason Luxury Real Estate, I added, looking directly at Samantha. She shook her head. That's impossible. Any loan using company assets requires my signature. Exactly. I said, pulling a magnifying glass from the briefcase. Sometimes, a little drama helps. I handed it to her, along with one of the contracts. Observe the signature line. Samantha examined the document under the magnifying glass. I watched her go from bewilderment to recognition, and from there to a fury so pure it seemed to concentrate all the years she had spent building her empire. It's my signature, she murmured finally. Technically, yes, I replied. But unless you've recently become a fan of timeshares and ski instructors, I doubt you put it there. The word hung in the air like a sentence. Forgery. We were no longer talking about simple theft. This was a federal crime. And Chloe's face said it all. She finally understood that her venture had ceased to be a family spat and had become a real conviction. You forged my signature? Samantha asked, her voice cold enough to cut the air. Chloe broke. I can explain, she babbled. It wasn't. It wasn't going to be permanent. It was all going to work out. The condos were going to go up in value. The beach house was an investment. I swear. Samantha took a deep breath, like someone fighting to maintain control. You forged my signature. To steal over $1 million. You ruined my marriage with your lies. You lived off my money. And you destroyed everything I built. It was an almost hypnotic moment. Watching a sisterly relationship disintegrate before my eyes had a tragic beauty, an almost poetic rawness. Years of trust, childhood memories, and family ties. Reduced to papers stained with deceit. I'm your sister. Chloe cried, desperate. Family has to mean something. Samantha stood up slowly, every movement charged with an icy authority. Yes. It does mean something, she said at last. And that's why what you did is unforgivable. She took out her cell phone with terrifying calm. Who are you calling? Chloe asked, though we all knew the answer. The police, she replied, without raising her voice. Then my lawyer. Then my accountant. And probably the FBI. This crosses state lines. It's not just theft anymore. It's a federal crime. Chloe collapsed in tears, but this time it wasn't a cry of rage or frustration. It was the dry, hopeless sob of someone who understands that their life, as they knew it, has just ended. Samantha looked up at me. Through the tension, the documents, and the emotional destruction in that room, for the first time in a long time, I saw something resembling respect in her eyes. Ryan. I need to ask you something, she said, barely a whisper. Is there any possibility that we can fix this? I just watched her in silence. That instant reminded me of revenge movies, the moment the hero has the villain at his mercy, and the audience waits to see if he will show compassion or deliver the final blow. But real life doesn't work like that. Sometimes the most devastating thing you can do to someone isn't to destroy them, but to let them live with the consequences of their own choices. She was looking at me with the same eyes that had once made me give in, the same ones that melted me one day. But I felt nothing. The empathy had been extinguished, replaced by an icy serenity. I stood up, gathered my documents calmly, and gave her one last look. "There's nothing to fix, Samantha," I said slowly. "The only thing left is for everyone to face what they caused." I walked out of the room, leaving behind the echo of her trembling breath, her sister's choked sobbing, and the distant sound of my own footsteps, walking away. There were no shouts, no apologies, no reconciliation. Just the silence that remains when the truth finally demolishes everything that seemed solid. And while I could say that it hurt me, the reality is that I felt something much more complex: freedom. The same eyes that had once convinced me to propose, that made me believe I was the luckiest man in the world when she said yes. Those eyes that, at our wedding, looked at me with so much love and trust that I ended up crying in front of more than 300 of Manhattan's most influential people. Now, those same eyes were begging me to save her from the disaster she herself had caused. "Is there any possibility of fixing this?" she asked, her voice so fragile that for a moment, it hurt me to hear it. "Almost," I replied slowly, standing up and gathering my documents with the same meticulous calm I had brought to this whole spectacle. Each paper went back into its folder, each folder into its place inside the briefcase, as if I were closing an impeccably executed business presentation. "Fix this," I repeated, tasting the words, trying to understand what language she was speaking. "Samantha. Honey. I don't think you understand what this really means anymore." Behind her, Chloe had stopped crying long enough to watch us, and I could see the desperation disguised as calculation in her gaze. She was probably thinking that if Samantha and I got back together, maybe she could escape the legal hell she herself had created. Maybe she hoped her sister would protect her again, cover for her, erase her mistakes one more time, like always. But those times were over. "I know I made mistakes," Samantha said, trying to maintain some dignity as her entire world crumbled. "I trusted the wrong person. I should have believed you. And not," she made a weak gesture toward her sister, who was still shrunk in her seat like a statue dressed in designer clothes. "Instead of me, I finished for her. Instead of your husband. Instead of the man you promised to love, respect, and trust, till the end. Instead of the guy who dedicated 3 years of his life to building something with you. While your sister was secretly robbing you and poisoning you against me." Every word hit her like an invisible punch, and I could see her shrink a little more with each sentence. But the truth is, consequences don't care about feelings. It doesn't matter how much you regret it or how many times you say you're sorry. Consequences. They just exist. Heavy, final, and merciless. "Ryan, please," she said at last, and in her voice, there was real, unmasked pain. "I was wrong about everything. But we can start over. Rebuild. Do it right this time. Start over." As if the last 3 months had been a simple domestic dispute and not a total demolition of my reputation, led by the person I trusted most. As if I could erase from my memory the moment she kicked me out of our home without listening to a single word. As if I could forget her tone of absolute conviction when she told me, "Chloe would never lie to me about something like this." "And how do you plan to do it right, Samantha?" I asked, closing the briefcase with a click that resonated through the room like a full stop. "Are you going to give me back the 3 years I invested in this marriage? Are you going to erase the humiliation of being kicked out of my own home? Are you going to eliminate the fact that when you had to choose, you preferred to believe your lying, thieving sister over your husband, who never gave you a single reason to doubt him?" The silence that followed was suffocating. I watched her search for answers where there were none, trying to build justifications that no longer existed. Because that's the problem with trust. Once it's truly broken, no apology can repair it. You can apologize 1,000 times, promise to change, even sincerely believe it. But you can't unlearn what you discovered about someone when life put them to the test. And Samantha had shown me who she was when everything fell apart. Someone willing to destroy 3 years of marriage over the word of someone who had lied to her about everything else. That wasn't the kind of person I wanted to share the rest of my life with. "I love you," she said finally, desperate, playing her last card like someone who already knows the game is lost. I know. I ruined everything. But I love you, Ryan. That has to be worth something. I looked at her in silence for several seconds. This was the woman who had been the center of my life for 3 years. Brilliant, powerful, the executive capable of closing multi-million-dollar deals without blinking. But blind to the most obvious lies from her own sister. And in that instant, I felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, not love. Just an immense feeling of being finished. You know, Samantha, I said finally, I think you genuinely believe you love me. But I've learned something about your version of love. It's conditional. It depends on what other people say. It vanishes when someone whispers something ugly in your ear. That's not love, honey. That's convenience disguised as affection. Chloe tried to say something, but I raised a hand to stop her. You don't say a word, I warned, looking directly at her. You've already spoken enough for a lifetime. In a few minutes, security will be here to remove you, and then you can explain to the authorities how you thought stealing over $1 million from your sister was a good idea. I took the briefcase and walked to the door, leaving behind the 2 women who had laid waste to their relationship and to Samantha's business empire. But before I left, she called out one last time. Ryan. Please. Don't leave like this. I know I was wrong. But we can fix this. I'll go to therapy. I'll do anything. We can. We can save this. I stopped, my hand on the doorknob. I gave her one last look, and I knew there was nothing more to say. Tears began to slide down her cheeks. Silent, delicate, as expensive as the makeup they were ruining. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of compassion for her. Almost. You want to know the saddest part of all this, Samantha? I asked in a low voice. That if you had just asked me about those accusations. If you had given me one minimal chance to defend myself before deciding I was guilty based only on your sister's words. None of this would have happened. Our marriage would still be intact. Your company would still be strong. And Chloe would still be your problem, not the FBI's. I opened the door, letting the everyday sounds of the hallway filter into the conference room. Phones ringing, trivial conversations. The simple noise of a reality where people didn't destroy lives over invented betrayals. But you chose to believe her instead of me, I continued calmly. You decided to trust the worst possible version of the man who never gave you a reason to doubt him. And now, you'll have to live with the consequences of that choice. I walked out of that room, out of the office building, and finally, out of the life I had built with a woman who, in the end, turned out to be a complete stranger. Behind me, I heard Chloe break into sobs while Samantha tried to calm her, but their voices faded as the elevator doors closed with a soft ding. As I watched the numbers descend to the ground floor, I understood something unexpected. I felt lighter than I had in months. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, I was free. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. And yes, that's true. But what they never tell you is that the best revenge isn't really revenge at all. Sometimes, the most satisfying thing is to simply watch as the universe takes care of settling the accounts, while you focus on building a better life far from the chaos. It's been 6 months since I closed that door in Samantha Jason's face. And I must admit, the view from my new reality is spectacular. I'm in my office, not that tiny, windowless space where I spent the months of the divorce, but a real office, with open windows and a coffee machine that doesn't sound like it's agonizing every time I turn it on. On the door, a simple sign, Kagan Project Solutions. The business is doing better than I ever imagined. It turns out that spending 3 years married to one of the most influential businesswomen in the city leaves you with useful contacts. When those same contacts found out I was single, available for independent project management work, and had always suspected I was the real brain behind several of Samantha's biggest successes. The phones didn't take long to ring. The irony was delicious. Samantha used to joke that I was her secret weapon in negotiations, the man who prevented disasters before they happened. She thought she was flattering me, but she was actually promoting my skills to all of Manhattan's business elite. Today, those same contacts are my clients, and I earn in 6 months what used to take me 2 years in salary. It's not the money that satisfies me, nor the recognition. What truly gives me peace is watching Samantha's empire crumble while I build something solid with my own 2 hands. 7 months after my departure, the news started to circulate. Mark, an old colleague, called me, excited. "You're not going to believe this, Ryan. Samantha's business is sinking. The investigation, the disappeared money, the investors fleeing. It's a total disaster. It all started with the banks. As soon as they detected the scope of the financial crimes committed by Chloe, they began to freeze accounts and demand immediate payments. Samantha, who used to move at the top of financial skyscrapers, started facing the same liquidity problems any small business owner would fear. Just with millions at stake. Then came the clients. Rich people hate uncertainty, and they hate headlines that tarnish their reputation even more. When the press revealed that the Jason luxury real estate account had been the victim of internal fraud by her own sister, the trust evaporated. Investors began to demand explanations that Samantha couldn't give. How do you admit to your shareholders that you were so distracted believing lies about your husband that you didn't notice your sister robbing you blind? The final blow came from the regulators. Federal agencies began to review her business practices, and at that point, it didn't matter if she was guilty or not. Just the fact of being under investigation was enough to destroy her reputation. In 4 months, Samantha went from being real estate royalty to a woman desperate to sell her company for pennies on the dollar. The personal impact was even more cruel. She had to sell the penthouse. The one she kicked me out of with such authority. She ended up in a small apartment in Queens, the closest thing to exile for someone accustomed to luxury. Her friendships, those that depended on expensive cocktails and dinners at exclusive restaurants, disappeared in a matter of days. And the true touch of justice came with Chloe. My lawyer kept me informed with almost professional enthusiasm. Federal charges, wire fraud, identity theft, and embezzlement. 8 years in prison. She tried to negotiate, claiming Samantha had been an accomplice. But when you spend your life lying, a point comes when no one believes you. Her own lawyer described her as the least reliable witness in recent judicial history. Samantha, even after everything, refused to testify against her sister, and it cost her dearly. Chloe got no deal and ended up in a cell, learning what it means to live without credit cards or personal assistance. During those chaotic months, Samantha tried to contact me several times. Her messages started with apologies and ended in pleas. Please. I need to talk to someone who understands what happened. I didn't answer any of them. Not out of spite, though I admit, spite had its small place, but because there was nothing to say. What could I offer her? Consolation? Business advice? Lying to myself by pretending 3 years of manipulation hadn't happened? The day of the final divorce signing arrived, exactly 1 year after she kicked me out of the penthouse. We met at the courthouse, on neutral ground, with lawyers present and an atmosphere so impersonal it was almost appreciated. She looked smaller, exhausted, aged by the stress and public humiliation. "Ryan," she said, her voice cracking, I understand everything now. What Chloe did. What I did. I ruined the best thing I had. Out of pride and stupidity." I looked at her closely. I didn't feel anger or sadness. Just empty. "I know," I replied. "But understanding your mistakes doesn't erase them. It doesn't bring back the lost years. And it doesn't change the fact that when I needed you to trust me most, you chose your sister." She tried to respond, but I interrupted her calmly. Some decisions don't get a second chance, Samantha. There are mistakes that destroy things that can't be repaired. Judge Melissa called us up, and we signed the papers. Just like that, cold and final, we ended what had once been the most important thing in our lives. When I walked out of the courthouse, the air felt different. It wasn't joy, or relief, or sadness. It was a mix of silence and clarity, as if the constant noise in my head had finally been turned off. I walked aimlessly for several blocks before stopping in front of a small cafe. I ordered a black coffee and sat by the window, watching people pass by, unhurried, as if the world had decided to move on without needing me at all. In that moment, I understood something I had overlooked for years. I didn't need to prove anything. I didn't need to win. I didn't need revenge. The only thing I really wanted was peace. And for the first time, I felt it. The following months weren't easy, but they were mine. I learned to enjoy the silence, to cook without thinking about who was waiting for me, to fill the empty spaces with projects that truly motivated me. The company grew faster than I imagined, but what surprised me was realizing that success no longer felt like a comeback, but like a second chance. Samantha and Chloe faded from my life, like scars that, even if they don't hurt, remind you of who you were. And every time someone asks me if I would change anything that happened, I say no. Because without that fall, I never would have discovered what I was capable of. I don't know if destiny exists or if everything is a consequence of our own decisions. But if I learned anything from this whole story, it's that sometimes, losing everything is the only way to start living. Today, every time I turn on the lights in my office and see my name on the door, Ryan Kagan, I don't think about what I lost. I think about what I rebuilt. It's not about forgetting the past, but about stopping carrying it. And that, more than any triumph, is true freedom. Yeah.